obviously, story of the weekend wasn't the actual matches being played over in Asia. I'll do the best I can with explaining this. I'm sure I'll get parts wrong, and I will hear from you about the parts that I got wrong. So basically, my understanding is everyone, I'm assuming you're up to speed on what happened with Sinner. Basically testing positive for clostebol.
Close enough.
Didn't know it existed 2 months ago, so here we are. With clostebol. ITIA basically formed an independent tribunal. 2 of the 3 people on that independent tribunal didn't know that they were actually judging Jannik Sinner's offense, right? So one person on that on the independent tribunal knew that it was Sinner. The other 2 didn't. They were just basing their opinion of no negligence, no responsibility on the facts that were presented. Okay, so that's that. Level set, they found that there was, and this is generally agreed with, like there was no performance enhancement because it was in such small doses, came off of his trainer's finger. The trainer made a lot of mistakes, but ultimately you are kind of responsible for your team around you. I was fine because I don't think, my personal opinion, and which hasn't changed with this new WADA ruling and them wanting a harsher penalty for negligence and responsibility. My opinion was basically Jannik Sinner to put what is now going to be a Hall of Fame career at risk for no physical benefit. In my mind, that would have made him the worst, dumbest doper that had ever lived, right? And I just don't see a world where he would intentionally take on that amount of risk for no benefit. Okay, so I'll never know the answer. No one with any opinion will ever know the answer on intent. We can take him at his word. Mine's not even about taking someone at their word. It's just, it's nonsensical to take a drug that doesn't have really, in such a small amount that it has no impact on your performance if your whole point was to dope. Simple enough. So anyways, ITIA says no fault, no negligence, take away points and prize money at Palm Springs. Now, WADA comes back in and says, you know what? I think that they interpreted the no fault, no negligence rule incorrectly, have stated that they would like a suspension for 1 or 2 years. So this appeal and this story is ongoing. And from what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of people that want to deal in absolutes, right? Yes, no. You either did it or you didn't. Not always that simple. So we'll see what happens with WADA. But Kim, you've heard my opinion. What did I get wrong?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up very well. It's a very tough situation to kind of form an opinion about. I agree. My opinion hasn't changed since I spoke to him and his team at the US Open. I think, or my feeling at the moment is that WADA is also needs to prove a point, or to make sure that in the future this negligence kind of issue doesn't get used to actually do some things wrong, right? So that's a little bit where I stand with it. And again, like we've heard, a lot of people comment about certain things, like about, players not being treated the same way. And I mean, as far as I know, like when we did doping tests, our names weren't on the, like
you're a number. You're like a series of numbers and it changes
right?
Test to test. Yes.
Yep. And so eventually, I assume once you start, when the player or the team is notified, that's when you obviously know who you're dealing with. But I also, my opinion hasn't changed. I think it's a little bit more the reputation, maybe, that of the anti-doping committee, of the WADA, everything that needs to kind of stay in check. And they have to almost go with this further so that the whole negligence or the, that doesn't become an issue that gets used by other players to say, oh, I didn't know my coach did this, or I didn't know my trainer, did something. And that is something that I kind of, my feeling is, okay, they have to almost do it to stay valuable.
At this point, it feels like they're almost establishing precedent moving forward, and it's might be their attempt at clarity. One other talking point that I think needs to be said Me saying the rules isn't me defending the rules, just so we're clear. I'm just telling you the parameters that we're working inside of. So when I say there's a 48-hour period in all of these cases where if you can get your ducks in a row and you're organized enough to figure out what the source of claiming no fault, no negligence, the source of the substance is, you have like a 48-hour shot clock from when you're notified. The problem is that imagine waking up, getting an email, you not knowing what the hell is happening, but all of a sudden getting an email that says you've tested positive for something you probably can't spell. And then panic ensues. If it takes you more than 2 days to actually know the source, figure it out, organize, talk to your team, talk to everyone else, get to know the problem, to solve the problem, which Jannik Sinner did within that 48-hour period, which is why he has gotten some time, some grace, and didn't have to stop playing. Now, other cases where they don't know where it came from and they need more time and they can't, afford an army of lawyers quickly, they don't often operate and have clarity to submit a proposal. It's not just a guess. You have to submit a formal thing with confidence because that's what your case is going to be based off of. Jannik Sinner did that, which is why people are saying, well, he got special treatment. No, he did everything he has done so far. And listen, you might want him to get suspended. I don't disagree with you. I said during the U.S. Open, if they had suspended him for 6 months, I wouldn't have blinked. Like, I understand that we have some responsibility for our team and our surroundings. I don't think he did it on purpose. I bet a lot of money that he didn't do it on purpose. Doesn't mean I'm right. It just means I'm confident that he didn't. But he did execute within that 48-hour period. He got his ducks in a row, submitted, yada, yada, his case. Basically, he was able to move very quickly and in a very organized fashion with a bunch of fancy lawyers, which, listen, this isn't a tennis issue. If you can afford a fancy lawyer, you normally get to a result faster and softer than if you don't. So they're talking a 1 or 2 year ban, Kim. I have kind of my thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear yours first. How do you feel about a potential 1 or 2 year ban for Jannik Sinner?
I mean, I think that my first kind of feeling and opinion about it is that sounds very harsh. But again, this is how I also felt with Simona. Like, I think the rule, like you described, that you have 48 hours to find what the issue is. But then to me, there's also I was always very cautious, but you have to understand. I mean, think like putting myself in that situation. I'm not in control of what my trainer would have done. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many things. Like, we've had players that tested positive because they ate a steak in South America. Like, try to rewind, like, that kind of, where did that come from? And so there's so many ways and routes that this all can go, and not one case is the same. But I do think that there needs to be an understanding for situations for, I'm sure, there have been, and there probably are players who are doing things wrong and they will get caught. But when it is in situations like the ones that we've mentioned, I do feel like there needs to be the human side of it needs to be also addressed. Like, what does this do to Jannik's like mental state of mind too? Like, people just think you're like a robot and you go out there and you play and everything seems fine. And to me, those kind of things, I also feel like they are not taken in consideration enough.
Yeah, here we had an example from someone who, when this story broke, sent me their actual letters from the powers that be, informing them that they had tested positive at a challenger, right? And it was what you had said. It was like 30. I'll get the numbers wrong. It was between 30 and 40 guys in a challenger event had tested positive because of something they had consumed at the hotel, right? It was like bolognese or something. So I'm just saying, I'm not mad at you if you're like, hey, listen, there needs to be a penalty because at some point it is somewhat your responsibility, whether it's a responsibility of who you're hiring. We can't control what they do, but we can control who we hire. It's our job to vet. It sucks. It's imperfect, but I understand that argument. But also, you need to then realize that if 40 guys who are ranked between 150 and 300 lose the ability to make money and make a living for those 2 years, your opinion needs to be consistent. So I'm not asking you to have different opinions for different people. I'm actually asking you to have the same opinions for the same offenses. I think it's going to probably end up, and this is just pure conjecture, and I know this will be the headline. It feels like if they're asking for a year, it's going to end up being like a 6-month type thing, which would be in line with no fault, no negligence from past cases. But then that completely ignores their own 48-hour rule of getting everything in and being organized and the whole thing. So at some point, they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. Mike, do you have something? Or are you telling me to go to break?
Well, first it says that the appeal process with the CAS, generally they'll rule on the appeal within 3 months of the filing. So worst case scenario, we have to wait until the day after Christmas, depending on when they filed. So we could find out that he's suspended no days and 2025 calendar is good, or
so let's
but like hopefully we know before the end of this year.
Andy,
yeah.
Let me ask you this: what, like, if you were in his situation right now, like, where is he, in China? Like, what would you do? Like, would you keep playing?
I don't know if we get credit. Mike and I were just talking about this before we came on. I don't know that we can choose when time served starts. Right, we don't know that if he skips Beijing, if he automatically retroactively gets credit for that, because at that point you wouldn't have played a day past the U.S. Open, right? And you would just hope that worst case scenario you miss one slam. But let's think about what you just said, where if it comes down the day after Christmas or sometime around then, he's already gotten his training in for Australia, so that's locked in. He's already spent 3 weeks of his life being a psychopath about fitness, about everything else. That lands, if it's 3 months, he misses 1. If it's 6 months, he misses 2. If it's 9 months, he misses 3 slams. Like that is a massive thing for someone who is currently in their prime, or at least building towards the last 5% of their prime. So all that matters. And he has to kind of take the tack, to Kim's point, like mentally, to go through the hard yards of an off season. He has to do it if he doesn't know what the answer is going to be, because there's a chance that he gets to play in Australia. So here's what I think. I think, knowing nothing about anything ever, if they're saying a year, it's going to be like a 6-month situation. At the Open, when kind of this came up, I said I wouldn't have blinked at a 6-month suspension. I would have had a lot of sympathy and empathy for their team, for Jannik, because, again, I don't believe that he is an idiot. I don't think he's consciously going to do something that doesn't enhance performance to risk legacy, reputation, time, chance at slams, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel badly for Jannik, and I just feel if WADA is reinserting themselves into this conversation, that they're going to do it with intent in mind for a suspension. I would be surprised at this point if he wasn't suspended for some amount of time.